Thomas signed the divorce papers with a smirk of contempt. His wife, Rowena, was a financial deadweight, a failed artist in a worn-out sweater, staring out the window of their tiny apartment. He was upgrading to a life of penthouse views and champagne with his new, wealthy girlfriend, Bianca. He tossed the pen onto the table, the sound echoing in the silent room. "I'm building an empire, Rowena," he sneered. "I can't be anchored to a failure." He never expected to see her again. Until 1 year later, standing on the rainy tarmac of a private airfield, he watched her. The woman he'd left for being broke. And as she stepped out of a $75 million Gulfstream G700 jet, he finally realized he hadn't just divorced a failure. He'd divorced a billionaire. The smell of cheap, generic brand coffee filled the cramped apartment, a smell Thomas had come to despise. It was, to him, the scent of stagnation. He zipped his last Toomey suitcase with a sharp, final zip that felt like a judgment. Across the room, Rowena sat at their rickety kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a faded mug. She was wearing that same grey, pilled sweater he hated, the one with the frayed cuffs. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wasn't crying. That, more than anything, annoyed him. "You're not even going to say anything?" Thomas demanded, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive custom-tailored shirt. He was on his way up. He was a rising star associate at J.P. Morgan, and he had finally caught the eye of Bianca Langley, the daughter of one of the firm's biggest clients. Bianca was all gloss, ambition, and inherited wealth. She was, in a word, everything Rowena was not. Rowena finally looked up. Her eyes, a deep shade of hazel, were clear. Not sad, just empty. "What is there to say, Thomas? You've made your decision." "You're damn right I have," he scoffed, pacing the small living room. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of liberation and disgust. "I have spent 5 years trying to drag you into the real world. 5 years of me climbing the ladder, networking, bringing home the money while you— What do you do, Rowena? You doodle in those notebooks." "It's not doodling," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's my work. I've explained it to you." "Oh, the work," he laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Your algorithms for logistics. You're an art history major who plays with code. It's a hobby, Rowena. It's not a career. It doesn't pay for the Armani suits I need. It doesn't get us into the benefit galas. It doesn't get us out of this dump." He kicked a small woven basket by the door, scattering a few envelopes. "I never asked for Armani suits," she replied, her gaze dropping back to her mug. "I just asked for your support." "Support?" He was incredulous. "I am supporting you. I'm supporting this entire apartment. I'm supporting your dream, which, let's be honest, is just an excuse to not get a real job. Do you know what people say about me at the firm? They see my ambition, and then they ask about my artist wife. They pity me." He picked up his briefcase, the leather gleaming under the single dim overhead light. "Bianca. She understands. Her family builds things. They don't just dream about them. When I'm with her, I feel like I'm moving forward. When I'm with you," he motioned around the room, at the second-hand furniture and her cluttered desk, "I feel like I'm drowning." He strode to the table and pulled the divorce papers from his briefcase, sliding them across the table. "I've had them drawn up. It's a clean break. You don't have any assets, so there's nothing to split. I'll even be generous and pay your rent for the next 2 months. After that, you're on your own. Go get a job as a barista, or whatever it is you people do." Rowena looked at the papers. She saw the name of the high-powered law firm, one that Thomas couldn't possibly afford on his own salary. Bianca was already paying his bills. A slow, cold understanding settled over her. He hadn't just met Bianca. He had been planning this. This was an extraction. She picked up the cheap Bic pen he'd left, and, without a single hesitation, signed her name. Rowena Wakefield. He blinked, surprised at the lack of a fight. He'd been prepared for tears, for begging. This quiet compliance was almost anticlimactic. "Good," he said, snatching the papers back. "That's the most productive thing you've done in years." He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the knob. He looked back at her, a final, pitying sneer on his face. "I'm going to be at the top of the world, Rowena. I'm going to have the penthouse, the summer home in the Hamptons, the recognition I deserve. And you'll still be right here, in this grey sweater, drinking your bad coffee, doodling in your notebooks. You are an anchor, and I am finally cutting the rope." He opened the door and left. The lock clicked shut, a final metallic sound. For a long moment, Rowena didn't move. The silence of the apartment was vast. Then, slowly, she stood up. She walked to her desk, which was covered in what Thomas called doodles. They were, in fact, complex data flow charts and lines of innovative code. She picked up her phone and made a call. "Owen," she said, her voice no longer empty, but ringing with a sudden cold clarity. "It's Rowena. He's gone. Yes, I'm okay. No, it's better this way. It's time. Let's liquidate the Wakefield Trust options. Just the starter fund. We need to rent a real office. And Owen, no more coffee shops. We're going dark. Full stealth mode. It's time to build." She hung up, walked to the window, and looked down at the street below. She watched Thomas toss his suitcases into the back of a gleaming black Mercedes S-Class, Bianca's car, and speed away, never looking back. "You're right about one thing, Thomas," she whispered to the empty room, a small, dangerous smile touching her lips. "I won't be here." 6 months passed, and the chasm between Thomas's and Rowena's lives widened into a canyon. Thomas's new life was a performance. He moved into Bianca Langley's stunning duplex penthouse overlooking Central Park. His new reality was a whirlwind of social obligations, each one a carefully managed photo opportunity. He and Bianca were the new it couple. Their faces splashed across gossip columns and a steady stream of curated Instagram posts. He swapped his off-the-rack suits for Tom Ford and Brioni, his Timex for a Rolex Submariner, a welcome gift from Bianca's father. He was living the life he'd always claimed to deserve. Tonight was a prime example, the Metropolitan Museum of Art's winter benefit. He stood in a sea of tuxedos, a champagne flute in his hand, Bianca a glittering cold jewel on his arm. "Thomas, darling," she said, her voice a low purr that always had an edge of command. "There's my father. Go be charming. He's still on the fence about your big idea for the new fund." "Of course," Thomas said, flashing his practiced, brilliant smile. He navigated the crowd to Mr. Langley, a formidable man with the cold eyes of a predator. "Mr. Langley, a wonderful evening," Thomas said, his voice brimming with a confidence he didn't quite feel. Langley grunted, barely looking at him. "Thomas, still enjoying the car?" "The Mercedes is a dream, sir." "Thank you. I was hoping we could discuss the emerging markets proposal I sent over." "Proposal?" Langley cut him off, sipping his scotch. "It's fine. A little derivative. But fine. Tell me, Thomas." He turned his full, unsettling attention on him. "What's your real value add?" "My daughter. She collects things. People included. I need to know if you're an asset or an acquisition. Acquisitions can be depreciated and discarded." Thomas's smile faltered. The blood drained from his face. I'm an asset, sir. I have a keen eye for undervalued opportunities. I'm not afraid to be ruthless. I cut deadweight. You know, I did it in my personal life. I'll do it in business." Langley stared at him for a long, agonizing second, then clapped him hard on the shoulder. "Good lad. That's what I like to hear. No room for sentiment in this business." As Langley turned away, Thomas's hand tightened on his glass. He was a thing, an acquisition. He glanced back at Bianca, who was laughing with a rival banker, not even looking his way. A cold dread settled in his stomach, but he shoved it down, replacing it with his familiar sneer. "This is the price of admission," he told himself. "It's better than being broke with Rowena." Rowena's new life was a fortress. She had, as promised, vanished. She hadn't just rented an office, she'd leased a secure, windowless data processing space in a nondescript building in Long Island City. She and her co-founder, Owen, a brilliant, socially awkward coder she'd known since college, worked under a blanket of total secrecy. They called their project Aura. Thomas had been right about one thing. Rowena was an art history major, but she was also the daughter of the Wakefield family, an old money dynasty that had built its fortune in railroads and shipping. They were private, almost reclusive, and had been pioneers in logistics for a century. Rowena, the art historian, had grown up listening to her grandfather, a logistics genius, lament the inefficiencies of modern global shipping. Aura was her solution. It wasn't just code, it was a revolutionary predictive AI. It didn't just track shipments, it anticipated them. It analyzed global weather, port traffic, political instability, trucking routes, and even social media sentiment to dynamically reroute cargo before a problem even occurred. It was a system that could save a single corporation billions. Her life was the antithesis of Thomas's. She wore the same black turtleneck and jeans every day. Her penthouse was a tiny, bare-bones studio above the office. Her meals were delivery containers of pad thai, eaten at 3 a.m. over a server rack. "The predictive modeling is off," Owen mumbled, his face pale in the glow of 6 monitors. "The Port Authority data from Singapore isn't syncing with the new weather pattern algorithm. It's creating a 0.08% latency. It's a failure." He dropped his head into his hands. Rowena, who had been coding for 36 hours straight, walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "It's not a failure, Owen. It's a bug. It's 6 months of work. We're burning through the seed money, the trust fund. It's not bottomless, Rowena. Your family." "My family isn't involved," she said, her voice sharp. "This is my money, from my trust. We do this on our own. We don't need them." Her estrangement from her family, who saw her as a runaway, was a deep and painful motivator. She would not fail. She sat down, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The problem isn't the weather data. The problem is here." She pointed to a line of code. "We're asking the AI to react to the port data. We need to teach it to ignore the official data and trust the predictive model instead. We need to be a step ahead of the Port Authority." That's insane," Owen said, his eyes widening. "You're talking about creating a shadow system, a system that knows more about the port than the port itself." "Exactly," Rowena said, a small, fierce smile on her face. "Thomas thought I was doodling. He has no idea what's coming." She hit the compile key. A new simulation began to run. The latency percentage on the screen flickered, dropped, and then settled at a perfect 0.000%. Owen just stared. "My God, Rowena, this isn't just a platform. This is a weapon." "No," Rowena said, leaning back, exhausted but triumphant. "It's an empire." Thomas's climb at J.P. Morgan was proving to be steeper than he'd anticipated. Being Bianca's +1 opened doors, but it didn't earn him respect. In fact, it often did the opposite. His colleagues saw him as a kept man, a social climbing accessory. He worked twice as hard, pushing aggressive, high-risk, high-reward strategies to prove he was more than just Mr. Bianca Langley. He was in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom, 20 floors above Manhattan, making the pitch of his life. And so, by leveraging Mr. Langley's existing shipping infrastructure, Thomas said, his voice smooth and confident, we can create a new fund that speculates on cargo futures. We anticipate, we buy low, we sell high. It's a license to print money. The room was silent. Mr. Langley, sitting at the head of the table, steepled his fingers. It's a bold play, Thomas, one of the senior partners said, tapping his pen. It's also incredibly risky. Your entire model is based on assuming you can predict delays. What if you're wrong? A storm hits, a port strike, your fund gets wiped out in an afternoon. That's the genius of it, Thomas said, trying not to sweat through his shirt. My team has built a predictive model. A model, Langley interrupted, his voice dry as sandpaper. Like the one you pitched last quarter, the one that failed to predict the LA port slowdown, the one that cost us, what was it, Charles? 8 million? Thomas froze. Sir, that was an anomaly. In my business, there are no anomalies, Langley said, standing up. There is only profit and loss. Your proposal is all flash, Thomas, all risk. It's what I'd expect from you. You're a sprinter, not a marathon runner. You're looking for the quick win to impress everyone. You lack foundation. He walked to the window, his back to Thomas. This meeting is over, and Thomas, stop trying to play at my level. Stick to managing Bianca's portfolio. It's what you're good at. The dismissal was total. It was public. Thomas stood there, his face burning with a humiliation so profound it was sickening. He gathered his papers in a haze, the whispers of the other partners following him out of the room. As he stepped into the elevator, his phone buzzed. It was Bianca. He stared at the text, his hand shaking with rage. He was a glorified escort. Langley was right. He had no foundation. He had no power. He was just an acquisition. The elevator doors opened, and he walked out onto the trading floor, his face a mask of cold fury. I will show them, he vowed. I will find a win so big they'll have to respect me. Meanwhile, Rowena and Owen were facing a different kind of rejection. They were in a tiny, sterile office in Midtown, pitching Aura to a small boutique venture capital firm. They had been at it for an hour, showing the data, the successful simulations, the 0.0% latency. The VC partner, a man in his late 20s wearing designer sneakers and a hoodie, leaned back and sighed. Look, I get it, the VC said, sounding bored. It's a cool algorithm, very academic, but where's the wow factor? Where's the app? The social integration? Logistics? It's just not sexy. It's a B2B play. It's boring. And your requested seed round is insane for a boring product. It's not boring, Owen protested, his voice cracking. It's revolutionary. It's billions of dollars in saved revenue. Maybe, the VC said, standing up, signaling the end of the meeting. But it's a hard no from us. You have no public-facing component, no marketing plan, and frankly, the two of you don't look like a billion-dollar company. You look like a grad school project. Come back when you have an app, or at least a logo that doesn't look like you made it in Microsoft Word. They were dismissed. Owen was crushed. He sat on the curb outside the building, his head in his hands. He's right. We're failures. We're broke. We spent all that money and we're just a grad school project. Rowena stood beside him, watching the New York traffic rush by. The VC's words stung, but not for the reason Owen thought. "You don't look like—" He was just like Thomas. He could only see the surface. "He's wrong, Owen," she said, her voice quiet. "How? We have 2 months of cash left. We can't keep the servers running on what's left of your trust fund. We're done." Rowena looked up at the skyscrapers, at the monuments to capital that surrounded them. "He's wrong because we're pitching to the wrong people. We're not selling an app. We're selling certainty. We're selling time. And the people who buy time aren't 20-year-old kids in hoodies. They're 200-year-old banks." She pulled out her phone. "What are you doing?" Owen asked. "My grandfather," she said, scrolling through her contacts. "He hated my father. But he had a private banker, a man in Zurich. He said, 'If you ever really need to build something, Rowena, something real, you call this number. Don't call your father.'" She found the number, a name she hadn't looked at in a decade. "Herr Balthazar." "We're not grad students," she said, hitting the call button. "We're just in the wrong country." She put the phone to her ear. "Guten Tag," a crisp, formal voice answered. "Balthazar speaking." "Herr Balthazar," Rowena said, her voice shifting, becoming colder, more authoritative, a voice Thomas had never heard. "This is Rowena Wakefield. My grandfather, Arthur Wakefield, told me to call you. Yes, that's right. I need to schedule a meeting. I have a logistics matter I'd like to discuss." "Yes." "Zurich. Next week will be fine." The flight to Zurich was a stark reminder of their financial state. They flew coach, squeezed into middle seats on a red-eye, the Aura mainframe, their entire company, sitting in a reinforced triple-locked Pelican case on Rowena's lap. They couldn't risk checking it, and they couldn't afford a second seat for it. The bank, Balthazar and Seer, was nothing like the glass and steel VC firms of New York. It was a centuries-old building on the Bahnhofstrasse, all carved wood, silent carpets, and oppressive, old-world gravity. Herr Balthazar was a man in his 70s, with eyes that seemed to have appraised kings and found them wanting. They set up their demo in a boardroom that looked more like a library. "Miss Wakefield," Balthazar said, his voice polite but icy. "Your grandfather was a great man, a client for 50 years. When you called, I assumed you were calling to discuss the management of your inheritance. Instead, you've brought a computer." "Herr Balthazar," Rowena said, matching his formal tone. "My grandfather built an empire on moving things from point A to point B. But he always said the real money wasn't in the moving, it was in the knowing when it would arrive. Certainty, he called it, the world's most valuable commodity." "I am familiar with Arthur's philosophies," Balthazar said. "This," Rowena said, gesturing to the monitor where Owen was pulling up the Aura interface, "is digital certainty. It's a predictive logistics engine. We don't just track cargo, Herr Balthazar. We predict and prevent every single delay, from a typhoon in the South China Sea to a trucker strike in Ohio, before it happens." Balthazar raised an eyebrow. "A bold claim. Run a simulation, Owen," Rowena commanded. "Let's use last month's Maersk shipping disaster, the one that cost 12 hedge funds their shirts," Owen typed. On the screen, the simulation began. They saw the Aura AI detect the tiny, unreported engine flaw on the cargo ship 3 days before it sailed. They watched it flag the impending, unforecasted storm, and they watched Aura automatically, silently, reroute the entire simulation's cargo onto a different ship, which arrived in Hamburg 72 hours ahead of schedule. The disaster ship, in their simulation, was flagged for emergency maintenance and never left port. Balthazar watched, his face impassive. When it was over, he was silent for a full minute. Owen was visibly shaking. "You are your grandfather's granddaughter," Balthazar said finally. It was the highest possible compliment. He was trying to build this with punch cards and telephones in 1970. "You've done it." He leaned forward. "This aura is not a startup, Miss Wakefield. It is a strategic asset. It is a new power. It must not be owned by children in hoodies. It must be protected. It must be invisible. That's why we're here," Rowena said. "We need capital. But more than that, we need discretion." "You will have it," Balthazar said. "My bank will fund you. A blank check. But on several conditions. First, you will incorporate here, in Switzerland. Second, your board will consist of my people. Third, and most important, no one can know who you are. The CEO of Aura will be a ghost, a trust, an anonymous entity. The tech world, the financial world, they love a face, a Jobs, a Musk. You will be the opposite. You will be a rumor. Is that understood, R.W. Wakefield?" "It's understood," Rowena said. "Aura doesn't have a face." "Excellent," Balthazar smiled for the first time. "Welcome to the real world of money, Miss Wakefield." Back in New York, Thomas was becoming obsessed. His humiliation at the hands of Mr. Langley had lit a fire under him. He was determined to find the next big thing, to win back his respect. He was digging through emerging market reports when a new file crossed his desk. It was a risk assessment for a new client Langley's firm was considering acquiring. The company was called Helios Logistics. Thomas ran the numbers. Helios was solid, but its margins were being squeezed. He dug deeper, pulling competitor reports, and that's when he saw it. A new player had entered the field in the last 3 months. A Swiss-incorporated entity with no public filings, no CEO, and no press. It was called Aura. It wasn't just competing with Helios, it was destroying it. Aura was undercutting every competitor by guaranteeing delivery dates to the minute. And they weren't failing. They hadn't missed a single delivery. They were operating with 100% efficiency. "That's impossible," Thomas muttered to himself, staring at the data. "No one has 100% efficiency. Not in global shipping. It's a statistical impossibility." He ran a search on Aura. Nothing. He ran a search on its holding company. Nothing. Just a shell corporation in Geneva, managed by Balthazar and Sie. He tried to find a CEO, a founder, a press contact. The digital footprint was zero. This Aura was a ghost. A ghost that was actively dismantling the company he was supposed to be analyzing. This was the anomaly that Langley had warned him about. "Charles," Thomas called out to his assistant, "get me everything you can on a company called Aura. I don't care what it takes. Bribe a shipping clerk, call the Port Authority in Rotterdam. I want to know who is behind this." "Who is R.W. Wakefield?" The assistant looked confused. "R.W. Wakefield, sir? The file just says Aura." Thomas pointed to a single buried line in the Swiss incorporation filing, a line he'd almost missed. "Primary trustee, R.W. Wakefield." "Find them," Thomas growled. "Find this Wakefield. This is the person who is making me look like a fool." He had no idea. He was staring at his ex-wife's name, her full, legal initials, and his only thought was that it was a competitor. He was hunting the ghost, completely oblivious to the fact that he used to be married to her. 1 year passed. The name Aura was no longer a whispered rumor. It was a global force. It was the ghost in the machine of global commerce. Forbes and the Wall Street Journal ran massive, frustrated cover stories. The Aura effect, how a ghost company conquered global shipping. Aura hadn't just gotten seed funding. It had, with Balthazar's backing, acquired 2 mid-level data firms and a small satellite network. It didn't just predict the world, it watched it in real time. It was valued conservatively at $30 billion, and still, no one knew who R.W. Wakefield was. The media speculated it was a reclusive European royal, a shadowy tech collective, or even a government-backed AI program. For Rowena, life was unrecognizably different. Her office was now the entire top floor of a secure, discreet building in Geneva, overlooking the lake. Her team was a hand-picked, NDA-bound group of 50 of the world's best data scientists. She and Owen were no longer coders, they were strategists. She still wore simple, elegant clothes, no flash or quality. She was the inverse of Bianca. She moved silently between Zurich, London, and a new data hub in Singapore. The Wakefield Trust was now a global entity, but its true power, aura, remained her secret. She was, in every sense of the word, a ghost. A very, very rich one. She had proven her grandfather right. She had built something real. For Thomas, that same year was a slow-motion catastrophe. His obsession with aura had become his white whale. He couldn't beat it. Every investment he made, aura was 3 steps ahead. He'd short a stock, only for aura to sign a new logistics deal with that exact company, sending its stock soaring. He'd go long on a commodity, only for aura to reroute global shipping, creating a glut that cratered the price. It was like playing chess against a god. He'd lost millions of J.P. Morgan's money. Then he lost millions of Mr. Langley's money. The firing was not a quiet, dignified affair. Langley had summoned him to his vast, oak-panelled office. Bianca was there, standing by the window, examining her nails. "You're done, Thomas," Langley said, not even bothering to sit down. He tossed a file onto his desk. "Your last 6 plays. All of them, were directly countered by aura. It's not just that you're losing, it's that you're predictable. This R.W. Wakefield, whoever he is playing you like a fiddle." "Sir, I just need more time. I'm close to finding out who they are," Thomas pleaded, his voice thin and reedy. "I don't care who they are," Langley roared, his face purple. "I care that they've cost me 90 million. I care that my daughter has attached herself to a fool, a lightweight. I told you a year ago you were an acquisition. Well, your value has depreciated to 0. Bianca," Thomas turned to her, desperate. "Tell him. The gala, the plans for the Hamptons." Bianca finally looked at him, her expression one of profound, icy boredom. "Thomas, don't make this pathetic. It's tacky. My father is right. You lost. You're a bad investment." She turned back to the window. "My driver is waiting for you downstairs. He'll take you to the penthouse to get your things. You have 1 hour. My assistant has already packed your bags." Thomas just stood there, his world dissolving. The J.P. Morgan job, the penthouse, the Rolex, the life, all of it, gone. All of it, taken from him by a ghost. "Get out of my office," Langley said. Thomas stumbled out, his ears ringing. He was back where he started, only worse. He was 40 years old, with a black mark on his professional record, a reputation as a failure, and nothing to his name but a few expensive suits he'd have to sell. He became a shell. He got a small, bleak apartment in Hoboken. He spent his days sending out resumes and his nights nursing cheap whiskey, his laptop open to the same blank search page. Who is R.W. Wakefield? His hatred for this anonymous person was the only thing keeping him alive. This Wakefield had taken everything. 3 months after his professional execution, Thomas got a call. It was from a small, desperate hedge fund, a bottom feeder firm that bought up toxic assets. They were willing to hire him as a junior analyst. It was a humiliating fall, but it was a paycheck. His new boss, a nervous man named Peterson, was trying to curry favor with Mr. Langley. Langley's firm is hosting a major M&A summit in London, Peterson explained, wringing his hands. He's flying all his associates out for it. He's allowed me to come. And you, Thomas, you're coming with me. You know these people. You're going to carry my bags and smile, understand? Maybe if we're lucky, Langley will throw us a scrap. Thomas felt the acid bile of humiliation rise in his throat. Carry bags, smile. He was a glorified bellhop, but he had no choice. Yes, Mr. Peterson. The trip was a nightmare of small humiliations. They flew commercial, while Thomas knew Bianca and her father would be taking the Langley private jet. They arrived at Farnborough Airport outside London, the premier private jet hub in Europe, in a miserable, driving rain. They were there to greet the Langley jet, a gesture of pure, pathetic subservience. Thomas stood on the wet tarmac under a small umbrella held by a stressed FBO, fixed base operator, employee. He was shivering in his off-the-rack suit. He watched as the sleek but relatively modest Learjet 75 carrying Langley and Bianca taxied to a stop. "Okay, Thomas, look sharp," Peterson hissed, straightening his tie. Thomas's eyes were on the Learjet, a knot of hatred and longing in his stomach. The door opened. Bianca stepped out, laughing, followed by her father, who was already on his phone, barking orders. They didn't even glance at Thomas or Peterson. They just marched toward the waiting Bentley. Thomas felt utterly invisible. He was nothing, a ghost, and then he heard it. A sound that was different from the Learjet's whine. It was a deep, powerful, throbbing hum. He turned. Through the rain, a second jet was descending, its landing lights cutting through the grey. But this wasn't a Learjet. It was massive, sleek, white, with a dark, predatory stripe down its fuselage. It touched down on the runway as lightly as a bird, a masterpiece of engineering. It taxied, not to the main row, but to the premier spot, directly in front of the main FBO terminal. "My God," Peterson breathed, his eyes wide. "That's a Gulfstream G700. That's a $75 million plane. That's real money. Who the hell is that?" Even Langley and Bianca stopped. They knew that plane. It was the largest, fastest, most exclusive private jet in the world. Whoever was on board was not just rich. They were in a different stratosphere. The Gulfstream's engines wound down. A pristine black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up silently, stopping just feet from where the jet's air stairs would deploy. The door of the G700 opened. The stairs unfolded with a quiet, expensive hiss. Thomas, Peterson, Langley, and Bianca all stood in the rain, watching. A man in a simple dark suit stepped out first, Owen. He looked different. His posture was confident, an earpiece in his ear. He surveyed the tarmac, then nodded back into the plane. And then she stepped out. She wasn't wearing a power suit. She was wearing simple, dark jeans, a plain, unbelievably expensive-looking cashmere sweater in a soft cream color, and flat Gucci loafers. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant knot. She wore no jewelry, save a simple, classic Patek Philippe watch. She looked rested, calm, and completely, utterly in charge. It was Rowena. Thomas's entire world tilted on its axis. The umbrella slipped from the FBO employee's hand. The rain hit Thomas's face, but he didn't feel it. His blood turned to ice. It wasn't possible. This was a hallucination. This was the stress, the whiskey. Rowena walked down the steps, followed by two other serious-looking team members. Owen opened the door to the Rolls-Royce for her, and just before she got in, she paused. She turned her head, her gaze sweeping across the tarmac, past the fawning FBO staff, past the small Learjet, and her eyes. They found him. She locked eyes with Thomas. There was no hatred in her gaze, no anger, no triumph. There was nothing. It was the cool, brief, dismissive glance one might give a piece of furniture they didn't recognize, a look of complete and total irrelevance. It was the exact same look of contempt he had given her when he'd left her in their apartment. "Thomas," Peterson was saying, shaking his arm. "Thomas, what's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost." Thomas couldn't breathe. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it would break his ribs. Bianca, standing by her Bentley, was staring. "Daddy, who is that woman? The one with the G700? She's incredible." Mr. Langley, for the first time Thomas had ever seen, looked genuinely intimidated. His face was pale. "My God," Langley whispered, his voice full of a sudden horrible awe. "Don't you know? That's her. That's the ghost. That's R.W. Wakefield." Bianca's mouth fell open. "R.W.? As in, that R.W.?" Thomas stumbled backward. The sound that came out of his throat was a dry, choked sob. R.W. Wakefield. Rowena Wakefield. The name she had signed on the divorce papers. The name he had never used. The family he'd never bothered to ask about. The doodles he'd mocked. The anchor he'd cut. Rowena got into the Rolls-Royce. The door closed with a silent, heavy thud. The car pulled away, disappearing toward London. Thomas dropped to his knees on the wet, cold tarmac, the rain plastering his cheap hair to his skull. He had divorced her for being broke, and he had just watched her step off a private jet as the most powerful and most mysterious billionaire on the planet. The aftermath of the tarmac reveal was not a loud explosion. It was a cold, sharp, silent implosion. For a long moment, no one moved. Thomas remained on his knees in the puddle, the icy rain plastering his cheap suit to his skin, his mind a roaring white void. The only sounds were the distant whine of another jet and the relentless drumming of the rain. Then Mr. Langley moved. He turned, not to Thomas, but to his daughter. The look they shared was one of deep, mutual, and profound embarrassment. This thing that Langley had allowed into his orbit, that Bianca had collected, was a cosmic fool. Langley's gaze finally settled on the kneeling man. His voice, when it came, was not the roar Thomas had expected. It was a whisper, a blade of ice, so full of contempt it was almost physical. "You," Langley whispered, the single word hanging in the air. He was connecting the dots with the speed of a supercomputer. The name, the timeline, the dead weight ex-wife Thomas had so proudly bragged about cutting loose. "You knew her." It was not a question. It was the passing of a final, damning sentence. She was my—" Thomas stammered, his throat closing. He couldn't form the word. "Wife!" It felt alien, impossible. "She was your wife," Langley finished, the pieces clicking into place with sickening, horrifying speed. "The anchor, the failed artist, the dead weight you cut. You idiot." Langley took a step closer, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. "You monumental, universe-dwarfing fool." Bianca, who had been frozen in a state of sheer disbelief, finally found her voice. It was dripping with a venom Thomas had never heard. "You were married to her?" Her disgust was absolute. This wasn't about a lost financial opportunity. This was a social catastrophe. She had been publicly, intimately associated with a man who had fumbled $1 trillion connection. And you let her go? Because she, what, wore a sweater? She looked at him as if he were a diseased animal. Get him out of my sight, Langley snarled, jabbing a finger not at Thomas, but at the terrified, trembling Peterson. Peterson, who looked as if he was about to be sick, nearly fell over himself to comply. This was no longer about business. It was about survival. Langley's wrath was a force of nature, and it was currently focused on the man Peterson had brought with him. "You're fired, Thomas!" Peterson shrieked, his voice cracking. He grabbed Thomas's arm, yanking him up from the puddle with surprising strength. "You're fired! You're done! Don't you ever come near me again!" He hauled Thomas, stumbling and numb, toward the terminal, a piece of human driftwood being dragged from a pristine beach. "You're radioactive," Peterson hissed, shoving him toward the security door. "You've ruined me. You've ruined everything." As Thomas was bundled away like common trash, the last thing he saw was Mr. Langley and Bianca climbing into their waiting Bentley, not sparing him a single backward glance. The door shut, and they were gone. Thomas's life was over. Not just his career, his life. The story was too good, too perfect, too devastatingly ironic. By the time the London M&A Summit had its first champagne reception that evening, the tale of Thomas the Fool was the only currency being traded. The man who had divorced R.W. Wakefield for being broke. He became a legend, a punchline, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and over expensive dinners from New York to Hong Kong. His flight home was a 10-hour nightmare. He sat crammed in a middle seat in economy, his damp suit smelling of jet fuel, while the cabin buzzed with the chatter of people returning from vacation. He was, in every sense, radioactive. When he landed, his J.P. Morgan access was already revoked. His email accounts were locked. His name was a black mark. He was fired from Peterson's firm before he'd even touched down. No one else would touch him. His resume, once his proudest achievement, was now a piece of fiction. He sent out hundreds of applications. He received 0 replies. The network he had spent a decade building had vanished overnight. The penthouse was long gone. The last of his savings, meant for a comeback, evaporated. He sold the Rolex Submariner for a fraction of its worth. He sold the Toomey luggage. He sold the Brioni and Tom Ford suits, each one a small, painful death, a stripping away of the man he had pretended to be. He ended up in a tiny, squalid room in a shared apartment in Hoboken, the one he'd always sneered at from his Manhattan high-rise. He found a job, a soul-crushing, mind-numbing data entry job in a windowless office in a New Jersey strip mall, a place that smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. He made minimum wage. He was living the exact life he had always feared, the exact life he had, in his arrogance, sentenced Rowena to. He spent his nights alone, the cheap, plastic bottle whiskey burning his throat. He'd stare at the water-stained ceiling, his laptop open. He was haunted. He replayed the scene on the tarmac, the hum of the G700, the cold, indifferent nothing in her eyes. And worse, he replayed the scene in their old apartment. He could see her now, so clearly, her quiet intensity. The doodles he'd mocked, he now recognized them as the complex data flow algorithms that were changing the world. Her hobby, her failure. He wasn't just haunted by her success, he was crushed, suffocated, and drowned by the sheer, staggering magnitude of his own blindness. He lived in this self-made hell for a full year. One Tuesday, after a particularly grueling day of entering shipping manifests, the irony was not lost on him. He saw it on his phone's news feed, a small article about the new Wakefield Foundation for Ethical Technology, a multi-billion-dollar philanthropic venture funded by Aura, to foster a new generation of innovators. There was a photo of its new Geneva headquarters. He broke. This wasn't a plan. It was a final, pathetic spasm of a dying man. He went back to his room, pulled out a piece of cheap legal pad paper, and began to write. He wrote for hours. The letter was a rambling, self-pitying, groveling mess. He tore up draft after draft. He apologized, the word looking thin and useless on the page. He confessed. He called himself a fool, blinded by ambition, unworthy. He told her how much he admired her. He detailed his entire fall, the tarmac, Langley, the data entry job, the single bare bulb room. He painted a picture of his abject misery, hoping, praying it would spark something. Pity, guilt, anything. And then, at the end, after pages of self-flagellation, he did it. He begged. He didn't ask for $1 million. He didn't ask for his old life. He just asked for help, a second chance, a loan to get back on his feet, anything to help him. "I know I don't deserve it," he wrote, the ink smearing from a drop of sweat from his hand. "But I am drowning, Rowena. Please." He found the address for the Geneva headquarters online. He put the letter in an envelope, walked in the rain to the post office, and sent it, a pathetic message in a bottle, to a billionaire ghost. 3 weeks later, Rowena was in her new office. It wasn't an office. It was a vast, minimalist space overlooking Lake Geneva, all glass and pale Swiss pine, more art gallery than workspace. She was standing over a large table, reviewing architectural blueprints, not for a new data hub, but for the first Wakefield Foundation University campus in Ghana. Owen, her COO, walked in. He too was transformed. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by the quiet, focused confidence of a man who managed a global-scale operation. He wore a simple, dark, perfectly tailored suit, but his eyes were the same, loyal and fiercely protective of her. He was holding a single, small, white envelope. "This came through the secure P.O. box in Zurich," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "It was forwarded. It's from him." Rowena didn't even look up from the blueprints. Her focus was absolute. "Burn it." Owen didn't move. I think you should see it," he said quietly. "I've already read it. You should see it." She sighed, a small, impatient breath. She finally turned, took the letter, and read it. Her face remained perfectly, unnervingly impassive. She read his groveling. She read his excuses. She read his detailed accounting of his own misery. She read his pathetic, veiled plea for money. She read it all, from "I was a fool" to "please." When she finished, she placed it neatly on the glass table. She was silent for a long moment, not looking at Owen, but at the letter. "The anchor," she murmured, a word she hadn't thought of in years. It was the last thing he had ever called her. "Rowena?" Owen asked, a note of concern in his voice. "Are you okay? I can have security." "I'm fine, Owen." Her voice was flat, colder than the lake outside. She walked to her desk, a simple, elegant piece of dark wood, and opened a drawer. She pulled out a checkbook. It wasn't the Aura corporate account, nor the Wakefield Foundation account. It was a simple, personal account from Balthazar and Kai. Her hand, holding an old-fashioned fountain pen, was perfectly steady. She wrote the date. She wrote Thomas Price. And she wrote the amount. She tore it out, folded it, and handed it to Owen. Then she took a small, pale blue sticky note from her desk and wrote 5 words on it. Owen looked at the check. He blinked, confused. It wasn't for $1 million. It wasn't for $100,000. It wasn't even for $10,000. It was for $5,000. Rowena, I don't understand, Owen said. It's insulting. Why this? Why anything? Rowena finally looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something. A wisp of dry, icy cold humor. He kept a ledger, you know, she said, her voice quiet. Back in the old apartment, on his laptop. He thought I didn't know. He tracked every frivolous expense of mine. My art supplies, the extra data storage, the good coffee. He called it Rowena's deficit. In our last year, he claimed I cost him just over $5,000. Owen's eyes widened. He stared at the check, then back at her, a slow, dawning comprehension spreading across his face. He was always meticulous. About his investments, Rowena continued. He said I was an anchor and a failure. He's right about one thing. He's a bad investment. And this, she tapped the check, is me closing the books, a final transaction. Owen looked at the sticky note. The 5 words, written in her clear, precise script, read, "For your anchors. Consider us even." He let out a single, sharp breath. It wasn't revenge. It was accounting. It was the final, perfect, most devastatingly complete act of closure. She wasn't just dismissing him. She was balancing her books, reclassifying him from ex-husband to liability paid in full. "Send this to his return address," she said. "Certified mail. Signature required." "Yes, R.W.," Owen said, a small, grim smile on his face. He pocketed the envelope. He turned and left the office, leaving her alone. Rowena didn't watch him go. She turned back to the blueprints, her focus shifting instantly, seamlessly. She picked up a red pen and made a correction to the data hub's routing. Thomas hadn't just been an anchor, he'd been a rounding error, a footnote in a chapter she had finished long ago, and she had just turned the page. Thomas learned the hard way that you should never, ever judge a book by its cover, or a person by their bank account. He was so focused on the appearance of wealth, on the glitter of Bianca's world, that he threw away a real diamond. He didn't just lose a wife, he lost an empire. Rowena's story isn't just about revenge. It's about a woman who refused to be defined by anyone, not by her old money family, and certainly not by a man who was too small to see her true worth. She built her own world from the ground up, on her own terms. What do you think of Rowena's final move? Was that $5,000 check the most savage or the most brilliant comeback you've ever heard? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of triumph and deserved consequences, make sure you hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and please subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable dramatic stories every single week.